The gun trembled in Vivian's hands as she pointed it directly at Isabella's heart. The ballroom filled with Manhattan's elite fell dead silent. Hundreds of guests frozen in terror as they watched a pregnant woman face down a killer on live television. If I can't have it all, then nobody can, Vivian screamed, her finger tightening on the trigger. But Isabella Sterling wasn't just any victim. She was a brilliant lawyer who had spent months planning the perfect trap. As death approached in slow motion, she smiled coldly and delivered the words that would destroy her would-be killer. You made one mistake. Vivian, you assumed I was weak. What happened next shocked the world and exposed a conspiracy so twisted, so deadly, that it would make headlines for years to come. This is the story of how a pregnant wife discovered her billionaire husband's darkest secrets and turned the tables on two serial killers who thought they could outsmart her. Are you ready for a story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate justice? Then buckle up, because this tale will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last word. If you love stories of strong women fighting back against impossible odds, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible true crime dramas. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Now let's go back to where it all began. The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floors of the Sterling mansion, their light reflecting off champagne glasses held by Manhattan's elite. The air was thick with expensive perfume, murmured conversations about stock portfolios, and the gentle tinkling of silver against fine china. This was the annual Sterling Empire Anniversary Gala, celebrating 25 years of financial dominance that had built a $2 billion empire. Isabella Sterling stood at the center of it all, her hand resting protectively over her 7-month pregnant belly. At 28, she was radiant in a flowing black evening gown that perfectly accommodated her growing figure. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and despite her exhaustion, she wore the practiced smile of a billionaire's wife. The guest senators, CEOs, Hollywood celebrities all paid their respects to the woman who had once been a formidable lawyer and was now the queen of the Sterling dynasty. Mrs. Sterling, you look absolutely glowing, gushed Senator Richardson's wife, air-kissing Isabella's cheeks. When are you due, dear? 8 weeks, Isabella replied warmly, though her lower back ached from standing in heels for 3 hours. Alexander and I can hardly wait to meet our little one. As if summoned by his name, Alexander Sterling appeared at her side, his arm sliding possessively around her waist. At 35, he was the picture of success, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair that only added to his distinguished appearance. His custom-tailored Armani tuxedo fit him perfectly, and his smile was the same one that had graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune magazine countless times. Darling, you should sit down, he murmured in her ear, his voice carrying that hint of British accent that made investors swoon and competitors nervous. You've been on your feet all evening. Isabella looked up at her husband of 3 years, remembering the passionate courtship that had begun in a conference room during a hostile takeover. Alexander had been the ruthless CEO seeking to acquire her client's company, and she had been the fierce lawyer standing in his way. Their intellectual sparring had turned into attraction, their late-night strategy sessions into candlelit dinners, and their professional rivalry into a love story that had captivated the financial world. I'm fine, she assured him, though the baby was pressing against her ribs uncomfortably. This is your night, Alexander. 25 years of Sterling Empire deserves to be celebrated properly. His eyes softened, or so she thought as he gazed down at her. You're incredible, Isabella. I don't know what I did to deserve you. The words should have warmed her heart, but lately something felt off. Alexander had been distant, taking more business trips, staying later at the office. When she asked about it, he always had a perfectly reasonable explanation. The Hong Kong expansion, the Tokyo merger, the London acquisition. Always something that required his personal attention. Always something that kept him away from home until the early hours of the morning. Mr. Sterling, interrupted a voice that made Isabella's skin crawl, though she couldn't quite explain why. Congratulations on another record-breaking quarter. Vivian Cross glided toward them like a predator in designer clothing. At 26, Alexander's personal assistant was everything Isabella wasn't: tall, blonde, with ice blue eyes and the kind of sleek sophistication that came from years of careful cultivation. Her red dress clung to her model-thin frame, and her smile was as sharp as a blade. Vivian. Alexander's voice changed subtly, becoming warmer. I didn't expect to see you here tonight. This is a family event. I know, but I wanted to personally deliver the contracts for the Singapore deal. They're in your study. Her eyes flicked to Isabella with barely concealed contempt. Hello, Mrs. Sterling. You look tired. The words were innocent enough, but the tone made Isabella's maternal instincts flare. There was something predatory about the way Vivian looked at Alexander, something possessive in her body language that set off every alarm bell in Isabella's legally trained mind. I'm perfectly fine, thank you, Isabella replied coolly. Though I am curious why business documents couldn't wait until Monday. Vivian's smile never wavered. Mr. Sterling likes to stay ahead of the competition. I'm sure you understand. Being a lawyer yourself, or rather, being a former lawyer. The emphasis on former was subtle but deliberate. Isabella had given up her partnership at Morrison, Klein and Associates, when she married Alexander, something she was beginning to regret more with each passing day. If you'll excuse me, Isabella said, her voice honey-sweet but with an edge of steel. I think I'll take my husband's advice and rest for a moment. The baby seems particularly active tonight. She turned away from Vivian's calculating gaze and made her way toward the grand staircase, her silk train rustling against the marble. Behind her, she could hear Alexander making small talk with their guests, his laugh rich and confident. But she also caught the whispered exchange between him and Vivian. Study. 10 minutes. The Sterling mansion was a maze of corridors and rooms, each more opulent than the last. Isabella had lived here for 3 years, but sometimes she still felt like a guest in her own home. The walls were lined with portraits of Alexander's ancestors, steel barons and railroad tycoons, who had built their fortune on the backs of others. She had never noticed before how cold their painted eyes looked, how similar they were to her husband's when he was closing a particularly ruthless deal. Her original intention had been to rest in the master bedroom, but as she climbed the stairs, her curiosity got the better of her. What was so urgent about these Singapore contracts that they couldn't wait until Monday? And why had Vivian looked so smug when delivering them? The hallway leading to Alexander's private study was dimly lit, decorated with expensive artwork and fresh orchids that were replaced daily by the staff. Isabella's heels made soft clicking sounds on the hardwood floor as she approached the heavy oak door. She raised her hand to knock, then froze as voices carried through the thick wood. Can't keep doing this. Alexander, she's getting suspicious. Vivian's voice was breathless, urgent. Isabella suspects nothing, Alexander replied, and Isabella's blood turned to ice at the dismissive tone. She's too focused on the baby to notice anything else. But what happens after the baby's born? You can't keep me hidden forever. I'm tired of being your dirty little secret. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Her heart began pounding so hard she was afraid they might hear it through the door. With trembling fingers, she pressed her ear closer to the wood. Patience, darling. Alexander's voice was tender in a way it hadn't been with Isabella in months. Everything is going according to plan. Isabella served her purpose. The marriage gave me access to her trust fund and her father's political connections. But she's becoming a liability now. What do you mean? Vivian's voice held a note of excitement that made Isabella's stomach churn. Her father's money helped me expand into the European markets, and her legal expertise was useful for the first few years. But now that Sterling Empire's established, I don't need her anymore. After the baby is born, we'll arrange for a tragic accident, postpartum depression, perhaps a suicide. Very sad, very believable. Isabella's knees nearly buckled. The man she had loved, the man whose child she was carrying, was calmly discussing her murder. She gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. her pregnancy making her feel more vulnerable than ever. And then, Vivian prompted, then you'll be Mrs. Sterling, as we've always planned. The grieving widower, left to raise his child alone, finding comfort in the arms of his devoted assistant. It's a story old as time, and the media will eat it up. What about the will? What if she's left everything to the child? Alexander's laugh was cold, calculating. I've been preparing for that contingency for months. I have a copy of her will, one that leaves everything to me in the event of her death, with provisions for the child's care. Of course, her signature is perfect. I've had plenty of practice forging it on various documents over the years. Isabella bit down on her knuckle to keep from screaming. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of thinking she was loved, and she had been nothing more than a business transaction, a means to an end, a problem to be solved. I'm 3 months pregnant. Alexander, Vivian said suddenly, and Isabella's world tilted on its axis. This time, I'm keeping it. Our child deserves to inherit the Sterling Empire, not hers. Are you certain? Alexander's voice was filled with a warmth Isabella recognized, but had never heard directed at her. After what happened with the others, this time is different. This time, I'm going to be your wife before I start showing. No one will question the timing. Others, Isabella's mind reeled. How many women had there been? How long had this been going on? You're incredible, Alexander murmured, and Isabella heard the sound of kissing, of whispered endearments, of promises for a future that didn't include her. With her heart breaking and her child kicking frantically in her womb as if sensing her distress, Isabella slowly backed away from the door. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely operate her phone, but somehow she managed to open the voice recording app. She needed evidence. She needed proof of what she had just heard. But as she raised the phone toward the door, it slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor. The sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. The voices inside the study stopped abruptly. What was that? Vivian's voice was sharp with panic. Isabella didn't wait to hear Alexander's response. She snatched up her phone and ran as fast as her pregnant body would allow, her silk gown rustling loudly as she hurried down the hallway. Behind her, she heard the study door open and Alexander's voice calling out, "Hello, is someone there?" She made it to the master bedroom just as footsteps echoed in the hallway. Throwing herself onto the king-size bed, she arranged herself as if she had been resting all along, her phone hidden beneath the pillow. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain it was visible through her dress. Alexander appeared in the doorway moments later, his hair slightly mussed, his bow tie askew. His eyes swept the room suspiciously before settling on her. "Isabella, I thought I heard something upstairs. I've been here for the past 10 minutes, she managed to say, her voice surprisingly steady. The baby was being particularly active, so I needed to lie down. Why is everything all right?" His eyes searched her face for any sign of deception. Isabella had faced down hostile witnesses in court, had negotiated million-dollar deals while keeping her emotions in check. But she had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. "Everything's fine," he said finally. "Just thought I heard footsteps in the hallway. Old houses make strange noises." Perhaps one of the staff was checking that everything was secure for the night. Perhaps. He moved closer to the bed, and Isabella had to fight every instinct not to recoil from the man who had just been planning her death. "How are you feeling? You left rather abruptly. Your assistant was being rather territorial. I thought it best to remove myself from the situation before I said something unladylike." Alexander's expression darkened slightly. "Vivian can be overzealous about work matters. I'll speak to her about maintaining appropriate boundaries." The hypocrisy of his words when he had just been planning their future together made Isabella want to laugh hysterically. Instead, she nodded weakly. "I think I'll stay up here for the rest of the evening. The party was wonderful, but I'm exhausted." "Of course." He leaned down to kiss her forehead, and Isabella had to steel herself not to flinch away from his lips. "Rest well, darling. Tomorrow we can start planning the nursery in earnest. as if there would be a tomorrow for her, as if she would live to see her child grow up. After Alexander left, Isabella lay in the darkness for what felt like hours, her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter kick and turn. Yes, daughter, they had decided not to find out the sex, but Isabella was certain she was carrying a girl. A little girl who would never know her mother if Alexander's plan succeeded. But Isabella Sterling, formerly Isabella Morrison, one of the most ruthless corporate lawyers in New York, was not going to go quietly into that good night. She had not clawed her way through Harvard Law School, had not spent years building an undefeated reputation in hostile takeovers, just to be discarded like yesterday's newspaper. If Alexander Sterling wanted to play games, she would show him how it was done. The next morning dawned gray and dreary, with November rain spattering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling penthouse. Isabella sat at the breakfast table, mechanically eating Greek yogurt and berries while watching Alexander read the Wall Street Journal. To any observer, they looked like the perfect power couple, the billionaire CEO and his pregnant wife, sharing a quiet morning before another day of empire building. But Isabella was studying her husband with new eyes. The way he held his coffee cup, the slight tension in his shoulders, the manner in which his gaze flicked to his phone every few seconds, she was cataloging everything, looking for tells, for patterns, for weaknesses. The Singapore deal closed this morning, Alexander announced without looking up from his paper. Vivian worked through the night to finalize the details. I bet she did, Isabella thought, but aloud she said, how wonderful. That expansion has been your baby for months. Indeed, I'll be traveling there next week to oversee the transition. The trip will be about 10 days. 10 days. More than enough time for Isabella to do what needed to be done. So close to my due date, she asked carefully. What if the baby comes early? Alexander finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. The doctors say you have at least 6 weeks, and if there's an emergency, I'm only a phone call away. Or you're hoping there will be an emergency, Isabella thought grimly. How convenient it would be if she went into premature labor while he was on another continent, if complications arose and there was no one to advocate for her medical care. Of course, she agreed. Business comes first. After Alexander left for the office, kissing her cheek with lips that had whispered sweet nothings to another woman the night before, Isabella waited exactly 30 minutes before springing into action. Pregnancy had made her more cautious, but it hadn't dimmed her sharp intellect or her instinct for self-preservation. Her first call was to Marcus Chen, a private investigator she had worked with during her law career. Marcus was discreet, thorough, and completely unscrupulous when the situation called for it. Isabella Morrison. His gravelly voice carried genuine surprise. I heard you'd gotten married and retired from the gladiator pit. It's Isabella Sterling now, and retirement is proving more dangerous than I anticipated. I need your help. Marcus. Name it. Full surveillance on Alexander Sterling and his personal assistant, Vivian Cross. I want to know where they go, who they see, what they eat for breakfast. Everything. That's going to be expensive. Your husband's a billionaire. He'll have security, counter-surveillance measures. Money is no object. And Marcus, this stays between us. My life may depend on it. There was a pause. Marcus had worked with Isabella long enough to know she didn't exaggerate. Give me 48 hours. Next, Isabella called her old law school roommate, Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus. Despite the shared surname, Sarah had specialized in forensic accounting and now worked for the FBI's white-collar crime division. Izzy. Sarah's voice was warm with genuine affection. How are you? How's the pregnancy? Complicated, Isabella replied. Sarah, I need a favor. A big one. And I need you to promise me complete confidentiality. That sounds ominous. I think my husband is trying to kill me. The line went silent for a long moment. Then, are you somewhere safe right now? For the moment, but I need to know everything about Alexander's business dealings, his finances, his history. I think there might be other women who, Isabella's voice caught, who didn't survive their relationships with him. Jesus, Izzy, Are you sure about this? Last night I overheard him planning my murder. I need evidence. Sarah. Legal, admissible evidence that will put him away forever. Okay, okay. Let me think. Sarah's voice had shifted into professional mode. I can't officially investigate without cause, but I can run some background checks. Look for patterns, unusual financial activity. Give me his full name, date of birth, social security number if you have it. Isabella rattled off the information, grateful that she had access to all of Alexander's personal documents. 3 years of marriage had given her complete insight into his business empire, or so she had thought. There's something else, Isabella continued. His assistant, Vivian Cross, she's pregnant with his child. I need to know everything about her too. I'm on it, but Izzy, if you're really in danger, you need to get out of there. Go stay with your parents. Check into a hotel. Something. If I run now, he'll know I'm on to him. I need to be smarter than that. I need to beat him at his own game. After ending the call, Isabella sat in the silence of the penthouse, her hands resting on her belly. The baby was quiet now, as if sensing her mother's need for stillness, for thinking time. The view from the 50th floor was spectacular. Central Park stretched out below, the city bustling with millions of people living their ordinary lives, unaware that in this glass tower, a woman was fighting for her survival. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. Love. The word felt like poison now. Isabella spent the rest of the day going through Alexander's home office with surgical precision. She photographed documents, copied files to a secure cloud drive, and searched for anything that might give her insight into her husband's true nature. What she found made her blood run cold. Hidden in a locked drawer, the combination was Vivian's birthday. Naturally were medical records for 3 women, Sarah Mitchell, Elena Rodriguez, and Catherine Wells. All had been romantically involved with Alexander. All had died in accidents within weeks of their relationships ending. Sarah Mitchell car accident. Vehicle went off a cliff in Malibu. She had been 6 months pregnant. Elena Rodriguez drowning accident during a weekend trip to the Hamptons. She had recently discovered she was pregnant and had been planning to tell Alexander. Catherine Wells' overdose of sleeping pills. Ruled suicide due to recent breakup. Her sister had insisted Catherine would never take her own life, but the case was closed due to lack of evidence. 3 women, 3 suspicious deaths, 3 unborn children who would never take their first breath. Isabella's hands were shaking as she photographed each document. Her husband wasn't just planning to kill her, he was a serial killer who specialized in murdering pregnant women. The baby kicked hard, as if protesting the horror of what they had discovered. I know, sweetheart, Isabella whispered to her unborn daughter. But Mommy's going to make sure you're safe. I promise. Her phone rang, making her jump. Marcus Chen's number appeared on the screen. What do you have for me? She answered without preamble. Your husband is definitely having an affair with his assistant. They've been meeting at a penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side. He's been paying the rent for 8 months. But Isabella, there's something else. Something that's going to shock you. I'm beyond shock at this point. Vivian Cross isn't pregnant. Isabella nearly dropped the phone. She's been visiting a fertility clinic, but not for pregnancy treatments. She had her ovaries removed 3 years ago due to ovarian cancer. It's impossible for her to conceive naturally. The room seemed to spin around Isabella. If Vivian wasn't pregnant, then why had she claimed to be? What was her endgame? There's more, Marcus continued. I tracked her financial records. She's been making large cash deposits into offshore accounts, money that's being traced back to life insurance policies. Life insurance policies on whom? On the women who died, Sarah Mitchell, Elena Rodriguez, Catherine Wells. Vivian Cross was the beneficiary on all 3 policies, listed as a business associate of Alexander Sterling. Isabella sank into Alexander's leather chair, her mind reeling. So she's not just his mistress. She's his partner. They've been killing women together. It gets worse. I found records of a life insurance policy taken out on you 6 months ago. Guess who the beneficiary is if Alexander dies first? Isabella closed her eyes. Vivian Cross. Bingo. You're worth more dead than alive. Isabella. To both of them. After Marcus hung up, Isabella sat in the growing darkness of Alexander's office, surrounded by evidence of his crimes. The man she had married, the man whose child she carried, was not just unfaithful, he was a monster. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated her. Isabella Sterling might have been a victim, but Isabella Morrison had been one of the most feared corporate lawyers in New York, and she was about to remind everyone why. Her phone buzzed with another text from Sarah. Found something big. Meet me tomorrow at the Federal Building. And Izzy, you were right to be scared. 3 days later, Isabella sat in a sterile conference room on the 23rd floor of the Federal Building, surrounded by manila folders, photographs, and evidence that painted a picture of systematic murder. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen had assembled a team of investigators, forensic accountants, and prosecutors who specialized in complex financial crimes. We've been trying to build a case against Alexander Sterling for 2 years, Agent Jennifer Walsh explained. She was a sharp-faced woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. We suspected he was involved in the deaths of his former associates, but we could never prove it. Your evidence changes everything. Isabella's hands rested protectively over her belly as she studied the crime board that now dominated one wall of the conference room. Photos of Sarah, Elena, and Catherine stared back at her, 3 women who had loved the wrong man and paid the ultimate price. The pattern is clear, Sarah continued, pointing to a timeline. Each woman discovered she was pregnant. Each woman began asking questions about Alexander's business dealings, and each woman died within 2 weeks of their relationship ending. What about Vivian Cross? Isabella asked. She's been helping him. Agent Walsh nodded grimly. We've been investigating her as well. She's not just his accomplice, she's the mastermind behind the insurance fraud. Each policy was purchased through shell companies she controlled, and she's the one who arranged the accidents. Isabella felt sick. So she seduces women into relationships with Alexander. They get pregnant, and when they become inconvenient, she eliminates them and collects the insurance money. It's a very lucrative partnership. But why fake her own pregnancy? What's the endgame? Agent Walsh exchanged glances with Sarah. We think she's planning to kill Alexander too. The life insurance policy on you lists her as the secondary beneficiary if Alexander dies first. If you both die in a tragic accident, maybe a car crash, a fire, something that could believably kill a family, she inherits everything. The baby kicked hard, and Isabella winced. At 34 weeks, she was getting uncomfortable, but she refused to let pregnancy slow her down, not when her life and her daughter's life hung in the balance. What do you need from me? She asked. We need you to wear a wire. Get them to confess on tape. We have enough circumstantial evidence to arrest them, but we need concrete proof of their intentions toward you. Isabella nodded without hesitation. When Alexander announced the Sterling Empire Annual Charity Gala for next Friday, it's going to be televised, attended by hundreds of New York's elite. If something goes wrong, it won't go wrong, Isabella interrupted. I know exactly how to make them reveal themselves. The week that followed was the longest of Isabella's life. She had to continue playing the role of the loving, trusting wife while secretly preparing to destroy the man who had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Alexander returned from his Singapore trip full of plans for their future plans that included her funeral. Apparently, the nursery is going to be perfect, he said over dinner at Le Bernardin, one of their favorite restaurants. I hired the best designer in the city. Everything will be ready for when our little prince arrives. What if it's a girl? Isabella asked, cutting into her Dover sole with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the wire taped to her ribs. It's a boy. I'm certain of it. Sterling men always have sons first. Alexander's smile was warm, paternal, and completely psychopathic. He'll inherit everything. Of course, the company, the properties, The legacy. And if something happens to me during childbirth, I mean, these things can be dangerous. Alexander reached across the table to take her hand, his thumb stroking over her wedding ring. Nothing will happen to you, darling. I'll make sure of it. The words were meant to be comforting, but Isabella heard the threat beneath them. He would make sure something happened to her. All right. I've been thinking about updating my will, she continued carefully, making sure everything is in order before the baby comes. A flicker of something annoyance alarm crossed Alexander's features. That's not necessary. We discussed this when we married. Everything goes to me, then to our children. It's all perfectly legal. I know, but I'd like to make some charitable bequests. My mother's foundation, the children's hospital, that sort of thing. Absolutely not. Alexander's voice sharpened, and Isabella saw a glimpse of the man behind the mask. The sterling fortune stays in the Sterling family. I won't have you giving away my life's work to strangers. Your life's work, I seem to remember contributing my trust fund and my legal expertise to building this empire. Alexander's jaw tightened. You contributed what any good wife contributes. Don't get ideas above your station. Isabella. The casual dismissal of 3 years of partnership, of a lifetime of achievement, was almost as painful as the betrayal. Almost. Of course not, Isabella replied meekly. I don't know what I was thinking. Alexander's expression softened. Pregnancy hormones. Darling. They make women emotional, irrational. Once the baby comes, you'll see things more clearly. If only he knew how clearly she was seeing things right now. The night of the Sterling Empire annual charity gala arrived with all the pomp and circumstance of a royal wedding. The ballroom at the Plaza Hotel had been transformed into a winter wonderland, with ice sculptures, white roses, and enough diamonds to blind a small army. The guest list read like a who's who of American power senators, judges, CEOs, celebrities, and old money aristocrats who could trace their lineage back to the Mayflower. Isabella stood in the receiving line wearing a stunning crimson gown that had been specially designed to accommodate her pregnancy. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and the Sterling family diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists. She looked every inch the billionaire's wife, gracious and serene and completely in control. Inside, her heart was racing. Alexander was in his element, working the room with the ease of a man born to command attention. He spoke eloquently about the charity of foundation for underprivileged children that Isabella now realized was probably a front for money laundering and accepted accolades from men who would sell their own mothers for a favorable business deal. Vivian Cross moved through the crowd like a shark in chum-filled waters. She wore black tonight, a sleek gown that emphasized her model-thin figure, and she made sure to touch Alexander's arm every time she approached him. To the casual observer, she was simply an efficient assistant. To Isabella, she was a predator marking her territory. Mrs. Sterling, Senator Richardson approached with his wife in tow. You look radiant. When are you due? 4 weeks, Isabella replied, one hand resting on her belly. I can hardly wait to meet our little one. You're first. Yes, Alexander and I are beyond excited. The lies flowed smoothly from her lips. Everything about this life had been a lie. So what was one more? As the evening progressed, Isabella positioned herself strategically near the podium where Alexander would make his keynote speech. The wire pressed uncomfortably against her ribs, but she ignored the discomfort. Everything depended on the next hour. At 10 o'clock sharp, Alexander took the stage. The cameras rolled. The audience settled into their seats, and Isabella felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. This was it. This was the moment that would determine whether she lived to raise her daughter or join the ranks of Alexander's victims. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander began, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. Tonight we celebrate not just the success of Sterling Empire, but the bonds of family, loyalty, and trust that make such success possible. Loyalty and trust. Isabella nearly laughed at the irony. My beautiful wife Isabella embodies everything I value most in this world. Alexander continued, gesturing toward her. She has been my partner, my advisor, and soon she will be the mother of the next generation of Sterlings. The audience applauded politely. Isabella smiled and waved, playing her part perfectly. But tonight, I have a confession to make, Alexander said, and Isabella's blood turned to ice. A confession that will shock many of you. This wasn't part of the plan. Alexander was supposed to stick to his prepared remarks about charitable giving and corporate responsibility. Isabella's eyes found Vivian in the crowd, and she saw her own alarm reflected in the other woman's face. The truth is, Alexander continued, his voice growing stronger, more confident, I have not been the husband Isabella deserves. I have betrayed her trust in the most fundamental way possible. The ballroom fell silent. Isabella could hear her own heartbeat over the sound system. I have been having an affair with my personal assistant, Vivian Cross, for the past 18 months. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Camera phones appeared, flash bulbs popped, and somewhere in the back of the room, Isabella heard someone say, "Holy shit!" But Alexander wasn't finished. More than that, I have been planning to end my marriage to Isabella permanently. Not through divorce, that would be too expensive, too complicated. I plan to murder her. The ballroom erupted in chaos. People screamed, chairs overturned, and security guards rushed toward the stage. But Alexander kept talking, his voice rising above the pandemonium. I killed 3 other women before Isabella: Sarah Mitchell, Elena Rodriguez, Catherine Wells. All were pregnant with my children. All became inconvenient. All had to be eliminated. Isabella stared at her husband in shock. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Why was he confessing? Why was he destroying himself? Then she saw Vivian Cross pushing through the crowd toward the stage. Her face twisted with rage, and Isabella understood. This wasn't Alexander's confession. It was Vivian's revenge. The truth hit Isabella like a physical blow as she watched Vivian Cross stride toward the podium with murder in her eyes. Alexander wasn't making a voluntary confession, someone else was controlling his words. Isabella's gaze swept the ballroom until she found them 2 men in dark suits standing near the sound booth. One holding what looked like a small electronic device, voice modulation technology. They were using Alexander's own voice against him, broadcasting a fabricated confession through the sound system while he stood frozen on stage, his mouth moving but no words coming out. His eyes were wide with terror and confusion as the damning words continued to pour from the speakers. I planned to kill Isabella after our child was born, the false Alexander continued. Make it look like an accident, like postpartum depression. Vivian Cross has been my partner in all of this. Together, we murdered 3 innocent women and their unborn children. Vivian had reached the side of the stage now, screaming at the sound technicians, but the damage was already done. The confession was being broadcast live on 3 television networks and streaming on social media. In the space of 5 minutes, Alexander Sterling had gone from respected billionaire to confessed serial killer in front of 500 witnesses and millions of viewers. But Isabella knew the truth was even more twisted than the fake confession suggested. The man holding the device was Marcus Chen, her private investigator. The other was FBI agent Walsh. They weren't destroying Alexander. They were forcing Vivian's hand. Turn it off, Vivian shrieked at the sound booth. Turn it off now. Security guards rushed toward her, but she pulled something from her evening bag, something that glinted silver in the ballroom's chandelier light. A gun. Nobody move, Vivian screamed, swinging the weapon toward the terrified crowd. This is all wrong. This isn't how it was supposed to happen. Isabella realized she was witnessing the complete breakdown of a psychopath. Vivian had spent months, maybe years, planning the perfect crime, and now her carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling in the most public way possible. Mrs. Cross, Agent Walsh's voice came through a megaphone. Put down the weapon. We have the building surrounded. Vivian. Alexander found his voice at last, stumbling toward the edge of the stage. What the hell is happening? What did you do? Vivian spun toward him, the gun shaking in her hands. What did I do? I did everything I planned, everything. Those women were never going to leave you alone. They were going to bleed you dry with child support, drag you through custody battles, ruin everything we built together. The confession Isabella had been hoping for was spilling out of Vivian's mouth in a torrent of rage and madness. Sarah Mitchell figured out about the offshore accounts, Vivian continued, her voice rising to a shriek. She was going to expose everything I had to stop her. You killed Sarah. Alexander's face was white with shock. You told me it was an accident. I killed all of them, Vivian screamed. Elena was going to take half your assets in a paternity suit. Catherine was threatening to go to the press about your business practices. They were going to destroy everything. Isabella felt the baby kick frantically inside her womb, responding to her elevated heart rate and stress hormones. She needed to get out of there, needed to protect her unborn child, but she was trapped in the center of the chaos with nowhere to run. And Isabella? Alexander asked, his voice barely audible. Vivian's laugh was the sound of breaking glass. Oh, Isabella was going to be special. The perfect grieving widower, devastated by his wife's tragic suicide after childbirth. Except I was going to frame you for it. Alexander, make it look like you killed her in a jealous rage when you found out about her affair. Yes, what affair, Isabella? Never. The affair I was going to fabricate. You idiot photos, emails, hotel receipts, all fake, but convincing enough to give you motive? You'd go to prison for life, and I'd inherit everything as your only remaining business partner. The audience was backing toward the exits now, but police had surrounded the building. No one was leaving until this was resolved. But why? Alexander asked, and for the first time since Isabella had known him, he sounded genuinely human, broken. I thought you loved me. Vivian's expression twisted with contempt. Love you? You're a pathetic, weak man who lets women walk all over you. I needed you. Alexander, your money, your connections, your reputation, but I never loved you. Isabella watched her husband crumble as he realized that everything he had believed about his life, his relationships, his reality, was a lie. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Then she remembered Sarah Mitchell's medical records, the 3 other women who had died because of his weakness and vanity, and her sympathy evaporated. Agent Walsh was moving closer to the stage now, her own weapon drawn. Ms. Cross, you're surrounded. Put down the gun and we can talk about this. Talk? Vivian laughed again. There's nothing to talk about. Do you know how long I've been planning this? How carefully I've built this whole elaborate scheme? I won't let you destroy it. She turned the gun toward Isabella. If I can't have it all, then nobody can. Time slowed to a crawl. Isabella saw Vivian's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the madness in her pale blue eyes, saw her own death approaching in slow motion. But she had not survived 3 years of marriage to a sociopath and 8 months of pregnancy terror just to die at the hands of his deranged accomplice. Isabella's legal training had taught her to think clearly under pressure, to find weaknesses in her opponent's arguments and exploit them ruthlessly. And she had spent the past week studying every detail of Vivian Cross's psychological profile. You made one mistake. Vivian, Isabella called out, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. Vivian's hand wavered slightly. What? You assumed I was weak. You assumed I was just another victim. Isabella stood slowly, her hands resting on her belly, projecting calm confidence despite the gun pointed at her heart. But I'm not Sarah Mitchell or Elena Rodriguez or Catherine Wells. I'm Isabella Morrison Sterling, and I've never lost a case in my life. Shut up! You want to know how I know you're going to lose? Isabella continued, taking a step closer to the edge of the stage. Because you're not the only one who's been planning for months. Vivian's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Isabella smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Did you really think I didn't know about the life insurance policies, about the offshore accounts, about the shell companies you've been using to launder money? That's impossible. I've been investigating you since the night I overheard you and Alexander in his study. I know about the fertility clinic, about your cancer treatments, about the fake pregnancy. I know about the apartments you've been renting under assumed names, the weapons you've been purchasing, the detailed plans you made for my murder. Vivian's face was pale now, her confidence cracking. More importantly, Isabella continued, I know about the other murders, not just Sarah, Elena, and Catherine. I know about Margaret Foster in 2018, David Chen in 2019, Rebecca Walsh in 2020. You've been killing people and collecting insurance money for 5 years. Vivian, long before you ever met Alexander. The gun was shaking badly in Vivian's hands now. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. Isabella reached slowly into her evening bag and pulled out a small recording device. I've been wearing a wire all evening. Courtesy of the FBI, everything you just confessed to has been recorded and broadcast to millions of people. Vivian's face went completely white. No, that's not possible. The fake pregnancy, the insurance fraud, the murders, it's all on tape. Oh, and Vivian, that electronic device Agent Walsh's team used to broadcast Alexander's confession. It was actually broadcasting your voice, your real confession, the one you're making right now. The ballroom was dead silent except for the sound of Vivian's ragged breathing. Isabella could see the exact moment when the other woman realized she had been outplayed, outmaneuvered, and utterly defeated. You bitch, Vivian whispered. I'm a lawyer, Isabella replied. It's what we do. Vivian raised the gun again, but Agent Walsh was already moving. The shot echoed through the ballroom, but it was Walsh's weapon that fired. Vivian Cross crumpled to the stage floor, clutching her shoulder, the gun sliding across the polished wood to land at Alexander's feet. The chaos that followed was a blur of police officers, paramedics, reporters, and shell-shocked socialites. Isabella found herself surrounded by FBI agents, all talking at once, asking questions, explaining procedures, but she barely heard them. She was looking at Alexander, who stood at the edge of the stage like a broken man. Their eyes met across the wreckage of their marriage, their life, their carefully constructed lie of happiness. Did you know, she asked quietly, about the others, about Sarah and Elena and Catherine? Alexander's face crumpled. I thought they were accidents, coincidences. Vivian told me. He stopped, shaking his head. I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. Yes, Isabella agreed. You were. Isabella, don't. She held up a hand to stop him. Just don't. Whatever you're about to say, whatever apology you think will make this better, save it. You may not have pulled the trigger, but you enabled her. Your vanity, your weakness, your need to be adored by beautiful women, it killed 3 innocent people. Alexander nodded miserably. What happens now? Isabella looked around the ballroom, at the overturned chairs and shattered glass, at the blood on the stage and the reporters pushing against the police barriers. Her entire life had just imploded on live television, but somehow she felt lighter than she had in months. Now, she said, now I take back everything you stole from me, my name, my reputation, my life, and I make sure you pay for what you've done. The company will be run by someone who doesn't associate with serial killers, Isabella finished. Don't worry, Alexander. I'll take very good care of our empire. As the FBI led Alexander away in handcuffs, he would face charges for accessory to murder, insurance fraud, and racketeering. Isabella placed both hands on her belly and felt her daughter kick strongly. It's okay, sweetheart, she whispered. Mommy won. We're safe now. 2 years later, Isabella Sterling, she had kept the name for business reasons, though she sometimes wondered if she should have reverted to Morrison, stood in the corner office that had once belonged to her husband. The space had been completely redecorated, the dark wood and leather replaced with light oak and cream-colored fabrics. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of Manhattan, and on clear days like this one, She could see all the way to the harbor. The Sterling Empire had been restructured from the ground up. The shell companies had been dissolved, the offshore accounts repatriated, and the company's focus had shifted from aggressive acquisition to sustainable development. Under Isabella's leadership, Sterling had become a leader in renewable energy, affordable housing, and educational technology. Mama, look. Isabella turned from her contemplation of the city skyline to find her 18-month-old daughter, Hope, toddling toward her on unsteady legs. The little girl had Alexander's dark hair, but Isabella's brown eyes, and her smile could light up the darkest room. "Very good, sweetheart," Isabella said, scooping Hope into her arms. "You're getting so strong." James Wilson, Isabella's husband of 6 months, appeared in the doorway with an apologetic smile. "Sorry, she escaped from the daycare center. I think she was looking for you." Isabella had married James in a small ceremony the previous fall, surrounded by close friends and family. He was everything Alexander had never been: kind, honest, supportive, and completely uninterested in her money. His own successful law practice meant he understood the demands of her career, and his gentle nature made him a wonderful stepfather to Hope. "How did the deposition go?" Isabella asked, settling Hope on her hip. "Vivian's lawyer is pushing for a plea deal, but the DA isn't interested. With 17 counts of murder in the first degree, she's looking at life without parole." Vivian Cross had been revealed as one of the most prolific serial killers in recent history. Her victims weren't limited to Alexander's former lovers. She had been killing people and collecting insurance money for nearly a decade. The FBI had connected her to 17 murders across 6 states, all carefully orchestrated to look like accidents or suicides. And Alexander, James's expression darkened slightly. "He'll be eligible for parole in 15 years. The prosecution couldn't prove he knew about the murders, but conspiracy charges and accessory after the fact were enough to put him away." Isabella nodded. She had testified at both trials, her voice steady and clear as she described the night she had overheard Alexander planning her death. The media had painted her as a heroic figure, the pregnant wife who had brought down a killer. But Isabella knew the truth was more complicated than that. She hadn't been a helpless victim. She had been a woman who had used every skill, every connection, every advantage at her disposal to survive and protect her child. It was what any mother would do. "There's something else," James continued. "I got a call from the prison this morning. Alexander wants to see Hope." Isabella's arms tightened around her daughter protectively. "Absolutely not. I told him you'd say that." "But Isabella, legally speaking, he does have parental rights. He's a convicted felon who enabled the murder of 3 women and their unborn children. No court in the country is going to grant him visitation rights." James held up his hands peacefully. "I'm not arguing with you. I'm just telling you what his lawyer said." Isabella carried Hope to the window, looking out at the city that sprawled below them. Somewhere in a federal prison upstate, Alexander Sterling was probably telling himself that he was the victim in all of this, that he had been manipulated and betrayed by the women in his life. Maybe that was even partially true, but it didn't change the fact that 3 innocent women were dead because of his weakness and vanity. "Mama," Hope babbled, reaching toward the glass. "Pretty?" "Yes, sweetheart. It's very pretty." Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "The Times reporter's here for your interview." The New York Times was doing a feature story on Isabella's transformation of Sterling Empire, part of a series on women who had rebuilt their lives after tragedy. Isabella had been reluctant to do the interview. She preferred to let her work speak for itself. But her publicist had convinced her that positive press would help with the IPO they were planning for next year. "I should go," she told James. "Can you take Hope back to daycare?" "Of course." James kissed her cheek and took their daughter, who went willingly into his arms. "Good luck with the interview." The reporter was younger than Isabella had expected, probably fresh out of journalism school and eager to make her mark. Her questions were predictable. How had Isabella survived such betrayal? What was it like to discover your husband was connected to multiple murders? How had she found the strength to rebuild? I think the media narrative has been somewhat simplified, Isabella said carefully. I wasn't just a victim who got lucky. I was a successful lawyer who used my training and experience to investigate a crime and build a case against the perpetrators. But surely there must have been moments when you felt helpless, vulnerable. Isabella considered the question. Of course, I was 7 months pregnant, living with a man I thought was planning to kill me. But I didn't let that vulnerability paralyze me. I used it to motivate me. What do you want people to take away from your story? Isabella looked out the window again, thinking of all the women who found themselves in dangerous relationships, who felt trapped by circumstance or fear or financial dependence. I want them to know that they're stronger than they think they are, she said finally. That being pregnant, or financially dependent, or legally naive doesn't make you powerless. You always have options, even when it doesn't feel like it. And Sterling Empire. What's next for the company? We're going public next year, Isabella replied. The IPO should raise enough capital to expand our renewable energy division and fund our new affordable housing initiative. We're also launching a foundation to support women entrepreneurs and domestic violence survivors. After the reporter left, Isabella sat alone in her office as the sun set over Manhattan. The building was quiet. Most of the staff had gone home to their families, but she often stayed late, working on proposals or reviewing contracts. It was easier to concentrate after hours, when the phone wasn't ringing and people weren't demanding her attention. Her computer chimed with an email from Marcus Chen. The private investigator had become something of a friend over the past 2 years, helping Isabella navigate the complex legal and financial challenges of rebuilding her life. Thought you'd want to know, the email read. Alexander's been writing letters to reporters, trying to sell his story, claims he was the real victim, manipulated by both you and Vivian. So far, no one's biting. Isabella deleted the email without replying. She had no interest in Alexander's attempts to rehabilitate his image or profit from his notoriety. He was part of her past now, a cautionary tale about the dangers of trusting the wrong person. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Dinner's ready when you get home. Hope keeps asking for Mama. Isabella smiled, gathering her things and preparing to leave the office. Home was a penthouse apartment in Tribeca, far from the Manhattan mansion where she had lived with Alexander. It was smaller, cozier, filled with Hope's toys and James's law books and the comfortable clutter of a real family. As she waited for the elevator, Isabella caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. At 31, she looked older than her years. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a gravity to her expression that spoke of hard-won wisdom. But she also looked stronger, more confident, more authentically herself than she had ever been as Alexander Sterling's wife. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and Isabella stepped inside, pressing the button for the parking garage. As the car descended through the floors of the building that had once represented everything she had lost, she thought about the woman she had been 2 years ago, naive, trusting, so desperate to be loved that she had ignored every red flag. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder, smarter, more careful about who she trusted. It wasn't necessarily a better version of herself, but it was a version that would survive. The elevator reached the parking garage, and Isabella walked toward her car, a sensible SUV, nothing like the flashy sports cars Alexander had preferred. As she drove through the quiet streets of Manhattan toward home, toward Hope and James and the life she had built from the ashes of her marriage, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had won, not just survived, but triumphed completely. Vivian Cross would spend the rest of her life in prison, paying for the 17 lives she had stolen. Alexander Sterling would serve 15 years for his role in her crimes, his reputation destroyed, his empire taken from him, and Isabella Sterling was free to raise her daughter in safety, free to build a company that actually helped people, free to love a man who would never betray her trust. It had been the worst 3 years of her life, followed by the best two. As she pulled into the parking garage of her building, Isabella's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer anyway. Isabella Sterling speaking. Mrs. Sterling, this is Detective Rodriguez with the NYPD. I'm calling about the Vivian Cross case. Isabella's blood chilled. What about it? She escaped from prison transport this afternoon. We're not sure how, but we think she had help from the outside. Mrs. Sterling, we have reason to believe you and your family may be in danger. The phone slipped from Isabella's suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor of the car. Through the windshield, she could see the entrance to her building, the warm glow of the lobby where the security guard sat reading his newspaper. Somewhere out there in the darkness of the city, Vivian Cross was free, and she would be coming for the woman who had destroyed her perfect plan. Isabella sat in her car for a long moment, her hands shaking, her heart pounding. Then she picked up her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and placed a call. Marcus, it's Isabella. I need your help again. Because if there was one thing Isabella Sterling had learned over the past 2 years, it was this: she would never be a victim again. Not to Alexander, not to Vivian, not to anyone. She was done running. This time, she would be ready. They say true betrayal doesn't come from enemies, but from those who claim to love us most. Imagine a lavish mansion where a pregnant wife faces her husband's mistress. The tension crackles like electricity as Sophia's venomous smile spreads across her face. He's tired of you, she hisses, stepping closer to Victoria, whose hand instinctively shields her unborn child. Then it happens, the crack of Sophia's hand striking Victoria's cheek echoes through the room. But instead of defending his pregnant wife, Maxwell only gently restrains his mistress, his concern clearly for the wrong woman. What nobody realizes in this moment of ultimate betrayal, Victoria has been recording everything. This shocking, true story of deception, assault, and a wife's brilliant revenge will leave you speechless. Like this video if you believe in standing up for yourself. And subscribe for more incredible stories of resilience, justice, and triumph over those who underestimate the quiet ones. The most spectacular revenge is the one they never see coming. They say true betrayal doesn't come from enemies, but from those who claim to love us most. Imagine a lavish estate where a pregnant wife is forced to watch her husband defend another woman. Picture the mistress, a venomous smile on her lips, raising her hand and striking the wife, her expensive bracelet glinting under the chandelier. And as shocking as that moment is, the biggest twist has yet to be revealed because the betrayed wife has secretly recorded everything. In the affluent community of Lakewood Estates, Connecticut, stands the Matthews Mansion, a magnificent Georgian-style residence with pristine white columns and imported stone. The immaculate property, worth well over $8 million, represents the pinnacle of East Coast luxury living and hides secrets as deep as its manicured gardens. Victoria Matthews, a radiant woman of 30, stepped carefully down the winding staircase one crisp autumn morning, one hand protectively cradling her 5-month pregnant belly. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a simple chignon, her blue eyes troubled despite the morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Through the foyer, she could see her husband, Maxwell Matthews, pacing on the terrace, phone pressed firmly to his ear, his expression stormy. "I don't care what it takes. Get it done." He barked into the phone before abruptly ending the call. At 35, Maxwell had transformed from a computer science graduate with ambitious dreams to one of Connecticut's most successful tech entrepreneurs. His company, Pinnacle Innovations, had revolutionized data security systems, an irony not lost on Victoria as she contemplated the growing insecurity of her own marriage. "Is everything all right?" Victoria asked softly as she approached. "You seem tense lately." Maxwell's dark eyes flickered briefly to hers before returning to his phone. "Just business. Vic, nothing for you to worry about." He never quite met her gaze these days, a subtle but significant change that had begun 3 months ago. "I thought we might have lunch together today," she suggested, trying to recapture some semblance of the intimacy they once shared. "Dr. Bennett says I should be eating more protein for the baby, and there's that new bistro in town." "Can't today," Maxwell cut her off, checking his watch. "Board meeting at 11, then investor calls all afternoon." He brushed past her, dropping a perfunctory kiss on her cheek. "Don't wait up tonight. Might be late. Victoria stood alone on the terrace, the autumn breeze rustling the maple trees surrounding their property. This cold distance was becoming their new normal, and with each passing day, the vibrant, attentive man she'd married seemed to fade further away, replaced by a distracted stranger. She had ignored the first signs, the late-night calls he'd taken his study with the door closed, the sudden emergency business trips, the lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirts. Victoria had initially chided herself for being paranoid, blaming pregnancy hormones for heightening her anxieties. Mrs. Matthews, Nancy Wilson, Victoria's personal nurse, appeared at the terrace door, a warm, maternal woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Nancy had been hired when Victoria's pregnancy had briefly been classified as high risk in the early months. "It's time for your prenatal vitamins and morning checkup." Following Nancy inside, Victoria caught a glimpse of herself in the hallway mirror. Despite her pregnant glow, there was something fragile in her reflection, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. The Matthews name carried significant weight in Connecticut social circles, and Victoria had always performed her role flawlessly, the charitable, gracious wife who hosted perfect dinner parties and served on the right committees. But now, with her husband's growing coldness and her own suspicions mounting, Victoria wondered if the perfect life she thought she had built was merely an elaborate facade. 3 weeks later, Victoria agreed to attend the annual charity gala at Lakewood Country Club, if only to maintain appearances. She donned a flowing emerald gown that elegantly showcased her pregnant figure, her hair styled in soft waves. Maxwell had barely spoken to her on the drive over. Engrossed in emails on his phone, the country club ballroom sparkled under crystal chandeliers, the cream of Connecticut society mingling over champagne and carefully curated hors d'oeuvres. Victoria moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting congratulations on her pregnancy and deflecting gentle inquiries about Maxwell's increasing absence from social events. Victoria, darling, her friend, Madison Hayes, approached, stunning in a silver cocktail dress. Madison, a divorcee with a sharp tongue and sharper instincts, air-kissed Victoria's cheeks. "You look absolutely radiant. Pregnancy suits you." "Thank you," Victoria smiled, grateful for the familiar face. "Though I feel less than radiant most days." Madison's perfectly arched eyebrow rose. "And where is your elusive husband tonight, I swear? Maxwell has become something of a phantom lately." Victoria gestured vaguely across the room where Maxwell stood with a group of men, engrossed in conversation. "Business never stops. Apparently." Madison's gaze followed Victoria's, then narrowed slightly. "And who, pray tell, is that woman talking to your husband now?" Victoria turned to see a striking brunette in a crimson dress that left little to the imagination approaching Maxwell. The woman placed her hand on his arm with an intimacy that sent a cold shiver down Victoria's spine. What disturbed her most wasn't the woman's beauty, it was Maxwell's reaction. His entire demeanor changed, softening in a way Victoria hadn't seen in months. "I don't know," Victoria whispered, her mouth suddenly dry. Madison took a sip of champagne, eyes never leaving the pair. "That's Sophia Blake, relatively new to our circle. Word is she's been climbing the social ladder rather efficiently." Her tone suggested exactly what kind of efficiency she meant. Victoria watched as Sophia leaned closer to Maxwell, whispering something that made him laugh, a genuine laugh that Victoria hadn't heard directed at her in weeks. Something sharp and painful twisted in her chest. "If you'll excuse me," Victoria murmured to Madison. But instead of confronting the pair, she retreated to the ladies' room. Locking herself in a stall as tears threatened to spill, she pressed her hands against her belly, feeling the baby move, as if sensing her distress. "It's okay," she whispered, uncertain whether she was reassuring the baby or herself. "We're going to be okay," when Victoria emerged, composed once more. Maxwell was alone again. He barely acknowledged her for the remainder of the evening, and when they finally left, he announced he needed to return to the office. "At 11 at night?" Victoria questioned, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. "The Singapore market is opening," he replied flatly. "I need to be on a call." Victoria said nothing more, but as Maxwell's Bentley disappeared down the driveway, She made a decision. The next morning, she placed a call to Walter Thompson, a private investigator recommended by a friend who had gone through a similar situation years before. Thompson was in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that missed nothing. He met Victoria at a small cafe 30 miles from Lakewood Estates, where the likelihood of running into acquaintances was minimal. "I need to know if my husband is having an affair," Victoria said quietly, her hands cradling her pregnant belly beneath the table. "I need proof one way or another." Thompson studied her for a moment. "You understand that once you know something, you can't unknow it, Mrs. Matthews." Victoria met his gaze steadily. "I'd rather face an ugly truth than continue living with beautiful lies. Mr. Thompson." It took Thompson less than 2 weeks to provide Victoria with what she had both dreaded and needed: photographs of Maxwell meeting Sophia Blake at an upscale hotel in New York City, kissing her passionately in the elevator, entering a suite together. The timestamps showed they had spent 4 hours inside before emerging. Maxwell's arm possessively around Sophia's waist. Victoria's hands trembled as she stared at the images, tears dropping onto the glossy paper. The evidence was undeniable. Her worst fears confirmed. Victoria now faced the question of what to do next. That evening, while Maxwell was supposedly at a business dinner, Victoria made another decision. With Nancy's help, she carefully installed a small, nearly invisible security camera in their bedroom, hidden within an ornate antique clock on the mantelpiece. She also began carrying a discreet audio recorder, tucked into a specially sewn pocket in her cardigans and blouses. "Are you sure about this?" Nancy asked, concern etched on her face. "What are you planning to do with the recordings?" "I don't know yet," Victoria admitted. "But I need protection. I need leverage. And most of all, I need the truth, all of it." Over the next few days, Victoria collected evidence methodically. She recorded Maxwell's late-night calls to Sophia, his whispered promises of figuring something out and being together soon. Each revelation was a fresh wound, but Victoria found strength in her growing resolve. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her child's future. One rainy Sunday afternoon, Victoria was resting in the sitting room when the doorbell rang. Through the stained glass window in the foyer, she glimpsed a flash of red. The housekeeper answered, and moments later, Sophia Blake strode into Victoria's home as if she owned it, raindrops glistening on her leather jacket. Victoria's heart hammered in her chest as she slowly rose to her feet. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Sophia smiled, a predatory curve of perfectly painted lips. "Victoria Matthews. I presume I'm Sophia Blake." She glanced around the sitting room, appraising the antiques and artwork with a calculating eye. "Max said I could stop by anytime I was in the area. We have some business to discuss." The audacity was breathtaking. Victoria was acutely aware of the recorder in her cardigan pocket, capturing every word of this unprecedented confrontation. "My husband isn't home," Victoria said coolly, "and I'd appreciate it if you'd leave." Sophia's smile didn't falter. "Oh, but he's on his way. He texted me just minutes ago." As if on cue, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway filtered through the windows. Victoria's stomach clenched. The baby kicked, responding to her surge of stress hormones. She took a deep breath, determined to remain calm for her child's sake. Maxwell entered, shaking rain from his umbrella, and froze upon seeing both women facing each other in the sitting room. For a brief moment, panic flashed across his face before he forced a smile. "Sophia," he said, his voice unnaturally high. "I didn't expect you so soon." "Clearly," Victoria said, her gaze never leaving her husband's face. "Would you care to explain why your colleague is in our home on a Sunday?" Maxwell cleared his throat, setting down his briefcase. "Sophia is working with me on the Westbrook acquisition. We had some details to finalize." "On a Sunday?" Victoria pressed. "In our home rather than your office." Sophia moved toward Maxwell, placing her hand on his arm, the same possessive gesture Victoria had witnessed at the country club. "Max has been so generous with his time. The deal is time-sensitive, and we've been working around the clock." The intimacy in that simple touch was unmistakable. Victoria felt something inside her harden, a protective shell forming around her heart. "I think we should discuss this in the study," Maxwell said, guiding Sophia toward the hallway, avoiding Victoria's gaze. "No," Victoria said firmly. "Whatever business you have can wait until tomorrow, at your office, during business hours." She turned to Sophia. "Miserable Blake, I'd like you to leave now." Sophia's expression darkened. "You don't get to dictate who your husband works with, or when. Perhaps if you focused more on being an interesting partner rather than just an incubator, he wouldn't need to seek intellectual stimulation elsewhere." The room seemed to drop several degrees in temperature. Maxwell shifted uncomfortably but said nothing to defend his wife. "How dare you?" Victoria whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "How dare I?" What Sophia sneered, advancing a step closer. "State the obvious, he's outgrown you, Victoria. He needs someone who can match his ambition, his intellect, his passion. You're just the pretty wife he married to look respectable. But now he has me." She glanced at Victoria's pregnant figure with undisguised contempt. "And let's be honest, you're not exactly the vibrant woman you once were. Are you? Pregnancy can do that. I hear." Victoria stood her ground, though her heart was racing. "Maxwell," she said, turning to her husband, "are you going to allow her to speak to me this way in our home, while I'm carrying your child?" Maxwell's face contorted, torn between the two women for a moment. Victoria thought she saw a flicker of the man she'd married, someone who would protect her, stand by her. But then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're making this worse, Victoria," he said, his voice low. "Just let us talk in the study. This is important." The betrayal in those simple words cut deeper than any knife. Victoria stared at him, disbelief washing over her. "I'm making this worse." Sophia smirked triumphantly. She flicked her dark hair over her shoulder and turned to Maxwell. "See, this is exactly what I mean. Drama. Always drama with her." Something in Victoria snapped. "Get out of my house," she hissed, each word razor sharp. "Both of you, if necessary." Sophia laughed, the sound like breaking glass in the tense room. "Or what?" What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Sophia stepped forward, raised her hand, and slapped Victoria across the face. The crack echoed off the high ceilings as Victoria stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek in shock. For a moment, no one moved. Victoria's cheek burned, tears springing to her eyes more from the humiliation than the pain. Sophia stood with her hand still raised, a look of vicious satisfaction on her face. Maxwell lunged forward, but not to defend his wife, merely to restrain Sophia by the arm. "Sophia, don't," he said, his voice urgent but not angry. "You shouldn't." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The damage was done, not just by Sophia's hand, but by Maxwell's response in that critical moment. He had chosen the mistress over the mother of his child. Victoria straightened, one hand on her belly, the other still pressed to her stinging cheek. The recorder in her pocket had captured everything: the confrontation, the slap, Maxwell's tepid response. Her eyes, now dry and burning with resolve, locked onto her husband's. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with the certainty of her words. "Both of you." She turned and walked from the room with as much dignity as she could muster, leaving Maxwell calling half-heartedly after her. In their bedroom, Victoria locked the door and sank onto the edge of the bed, her breathing shallow, her mind racing. Nancy rushed in, using her spare key after knocking, received no answer. "Mrs. Matthews," she exclaimed, taking in Victoria's reddened cheek and trembling form. "What happened?" Between ragged breaths, Victoria recounted the confrontation. Nancy's face paled with anger and concern as she gently examined Victoria's cheek. "We need to check your blood pressure and the baby," Nancy insisted, retrieving her medical kit. "Stress like this isn't good for either of you." As Nancy worked, Victoria's shock gradually gave way to a cold clarity. She had been naive, trusting, willing to give Maxwell the benefit of the doubt despite mounting evidence. She had played by the rules of their social circle, maintaining appearances at the cost of her dignity, but no more. "This isn't just about me anymore," Victoria said, placing her hand protectively over her belly. "If Maxwell won't protect us, I will." That night, Victoria reviewed the recording of the confrontation, her hands steady as she transferred the audio file to her personal laptop. The evidence was damning not just of Sophia's assault, but of Maxwell's betrayal, his failure to defend his pregnant wife in their own home. While Maxwell slept in the guest room, not even attempting to speak with her, after the incident, Victoria made another call to Walter Thompson. "I need your help with something more," she told him. "I need to know everything about Sophia Blake, where she came from, what she wants, who she really is." Thompson's voice was grave on the other end of the line. "You're planning something, Mrs. Matthews." It wasn't a question, but Victoria answered anyway. "I'm planning to protect myself and my child, Mr. Thompson, by any means necessary." The next morning, Victoria contacted Andrew Campbell, one of Connecticut's most respected family lawyers. His office, located in a discreet building in Hartford, was deliberately unremarkable, a sanctuary for high-profile clients seeking privacy during their most vulnerable moments. Campbell, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and compassionate eyes that had seen every variation of marital discord, listened intently as Victoria played the recording of the confrontation. "This is serious, Mrs. Matthews," he said when the audio ended. "Assault on a pregnant woman, in your own home, with your husband's tacit approval. You have grounds for an immediate restraining order against Mrs. Blake and potentially a legal separation from your husband." Victoria nodded, her hands folded protectively over her belly. "I need to understand all my options. Mr. Campbell, I'm not making any rash decisions, but I need to be prepared." Campbell leaned forward, his expression grave. "With the evidence you've gathered, the photographs, the recordings, you're in a strong position. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state for divorce proceedings, meaning the court will divide marital property fairly, though not necessarily equally. Given your husband's actions and the potential harm to you and your unborn child, you could receive a favorable settlement." Victoria absorbed this information, her mind racing. "I don't want to destroy Maxwell," she said finally. "I just want protection for my child and myself, and I want him to understand the consequences of his choices." Campbell nodded. "Understanding the complex emotions at play, we'll proceed carefully. First, let's file for that restraining order against Mrs. Blake. Then we'll prepare documentation for a legal separation. Should you decide to pursue that route, we won't file anything regarding your marriage until you're absolutely certain." As Victoria left Campbell's office, a strange calm settled over her. For weeks, she had been reactive, responding to Maxwell's betrayal with hurt and confusion. Now, she was taking control, creating a plan, protecting what mattered most. That evening, while reviewing the security camera footage from their bedroom, Victoria made a startling discovery. Maxwell had been on the phone with Sophia, discussing not just their affair, but a calculated strategy to paint Victoria as emotionally unstable. Pregnancy hormones making her paranoid. Maxwell had said to position himself favorably should Victoria cause problems about their relationship. "Once the baby is born, if she doesn't cooperate, we can build a case that she's unfit," Maxwell had told Sophia. "I've seen it done before. The courts favor fathers with financial stability and strong legal teams." Victoria's blood ran cold as she realized they weren't just having an affair, they were plotting against her, planning to potentially take her child if she didn't quietly accept her husband's infidelity. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. She immediately sent the footage to Campbell with a short message: "We need to move faster." The next day, Victoria received a call from Walter Thompson. His investigation into Sophia Blake had yielded interesting results. Sophia wasn't the sophisticated socialite she presented herself as. She had reinvented herself numerous times, changing her name from Sarah Blackwood and leaving behind a trail of wealthy, married men whose bank accounts and reputations had suffered after their entanglements with her. "She's a professional," Thompson explained. She targets wealthy, married men, establishes herself in their lives, and then either extorts them or positions herself to benefit financially when the marriage inevitably collapses. Victoria's suspicions crystallized into certainty. She's using Maxwell, and he's letting her, Thompson confirmed. I've also discovered something else. Ms. Blake or Blackwood has been making inquiries about your family trust fund. She's particularly interested in the Matthews family holdings and seems to believe she can access them through your husband. This revelation added another layer to Victoria's understanding of the situation. It wasn't just an affair born of passion or Maxwell's midlife crisis. It was a calculated scheme, with her family's wealth as the ultimate prize. Armed with this knowledge, Victoria implemented the next phase of her plan. She began documenting every aspect of her pregnancy and health with meticulous care, ensuring that no one could later claim she was unfit or unstable. She also instructed Campbell to accelerate the process for the restraining order against Sophia. Meanwhile, Maxwell continued his charade of normalcy, barely acknowledging the confrontation that had occurred in their home. He spent most nights away, offering paper-thin excuses about work emergencies and international calls. When he did return home, he avoided Victoria entirely, sleeping in the guest room without explanation. One evening, Victoria overheard Maxwell on the terrace, arguing with someone on the phone, activating the recorder in her pocket. She moved closer to the open window. "You went too far," Maxwell was saying, his voice tense. "Slapping her wasn't part of the plan. You could have hurt the baby." A pause as the person, presumably Sophia, responded. "I don't care if she provoked you," Maxwell continued. "We need to be smarter about this. If she gets a restraining order, it complicates everything." Another pause. "No, I'm not defending her. I'm thinking strategically. We need to paint her as unreasonable, not ourselves as aggressive." Victoria's heart pounded as she realized that even Maxwell's apparent concern for the baby was merely tactical, not born of genuine care, but of calculating how best to position himself legally. That night, as Victoria lay in bed, her hand resting on her growing belly, she felt the baby move vigorously, as if responding to her thoughts. "We're going to be all right," she whispered. "I promise you that." The next morning, Campbell called with news. The restraining order against Sophia had been granted temporarily. Pending a full hearing the following week, Victoria would need to testify, presenting her evidence of the assault and the ongoing harassment. "Be prepared," Campbell warned. "Ms. Blake will likely counter with accusations of her own, and Maxwell might support her version of events." Victoria closed her eyes, absorbing the reality that her husband might publicly side against her. "I understand. I'll be ready." She spent the next few days gathering additional evidence, organizing her recordings, and preparing herself mentally for the hearing. Nancy stayed close, monitoring Victoria's health and providing much-needed emotional support. "You're the strongest woman I know," Nancy told her one evening as they shared tea in the kitchen. "Many would have crumbled under this kind of betrayal, especially while pregnant." Victoria smiled sadly. "I don't feel strong. I feel necessary. Like I don't have the luxury of falling apart because someone else depends on me now." She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby shift. "Besides, my mother always said that true strength isn't about never breaking, it's about how you put yourself back together." The night before the hearing, Victoria couldn't sleep. She paced her bedroom, rehearsing her testimony, reviewing the evidence one last time. Around midnight, she heard a car pull into the driveway, Maxwell returning from wherever he'd been spending his evenings. Victoria tensed, listening as he entered the house and moved through the foyer. To her surprise, his footsteps headed toward her door. A soft knock followed. "Victoria." Maxwell's voice was subdued. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, then opened the door, keeping one hand on the doorknob, ready to close it if necessary. Maxwell looked haggard, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. "What do you want, Maxwell?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd once found endearing. "I heard about the restraining order against Sophia. The hearing tomorrow." Victoria's expression remained neutral. And this is getting out of hand, he said, an edge of frustration in his voice. Legal proceedings, restraining orders, it's unnecessary drama. We could handle this privately. Like how you handled it when she slapped me in our home, Victoria countered, her voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. When you stood by and did nothing while your pregnant wife was assaulted. Maxwell had the decency to look ashamed, if only briefly. That was unfortunate. Sophia lost her temper. It won't happen again. You're right about that, Victoria agreed coldly. It won't happen again because she will legally be required to stay away from me. And if either of you violates that order, there will be consequences. Maxwell's expression hardened. You're being unreasonable. Sophia is important to my business dealings. This restraining order could complicate significant partnerships? Victoria stared at him, truly seeing him for perhaps the first time, not as the man she had loved, but as the stranger he had become. My safety and our child's well-being are non-negotiable. Maxwell, if your business dealings with Sophia are more important than that, then we have nothing more to discuss. She began to close the door, but Maxwell put his hand out, stopping it. Victoria, think about what you're doing. The Matthews name carries weight in this community. A public scandal like this should have been considered before you brought your mistress into our home. Victoria finished for him. Good night. Maxwell, this time, when she pushed the door closed, he didn't resist. Victoria leaned against it, heart pounding, but feeling stronger than she had in months. Tomorrow would be challenging, but she was ready to fight not just for herself, but for the future of her child. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and drizzly, mirroring Victoria's turbulent emotions. She dressed carefully in a conservative navy maternity dress, her hair pulled back in a simple chignon. Nancy accompanied her to the courthouse, a reassuring presence as they navigated the media that had already gathered outside. Mrs. Matthews, is it true your husband's mistress assaulted you? Called one reporter. Are you filing for divorce? Shouted another. Victoria kept her head high, one hand protectively cradling her belly as Andrew Campbell escorted her through the crowd and into the courthouse, inside the modestly sized courtroom. She saw Maxwell already seated with his attorney, Rachel Donovan, a sharp-featured woman known for her aggressive litigation style. Sophia Blake sat on the far side, looking surprisingly demure in a high-neck blouse and tailored pants, a calculated departure from her usual provocative style. Judge Eleanor Harmon, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, called the court to order. Campbell presented Victoria's case first, methodically laying out the evidence, the audio recording of the confrontation. Photographs of the reddened handprint on Victoria's cheek taken by Nancy immediately after the assault, and testimony from the housekeeper who had witnessed part of the altercation, when the recording played Sophia's venomous words. The unmistakable sound of the slap. Maxwell's tepid response, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. Victoria kept her eyes forward, avoiding looking at either Maxwell or Sophia. Sophia's attorney, Martin Reeves, attempted to paint the incident as a mutual disagreement that escalated and suggested Victoria had been the aggressor. Provoking Sophia with emotional accusations, he argued that Victoria was using the legal system to interfere with legitimate business relationships out of jealousy. Judge Harmon's expression grew increasingly skeptical as Reeves presented his case. When Sophia took the stand, she adopted a wounded, apologetic demeanor. I deeply regret that things escalated that day, Sophia said, her voice soft and contrite. But Mrs. Matthews was making wild accusations, becoming hysterical. I felt threatened, and I reacted poorly. I would never intentionally harm a pregnant woman. Victoria felt her blood pressure rising at the blatant lies, but maintained her composure when it was her turn to testify. She spoke clearly and factually, describing how Sophia had appeared uninvited at her home, the verbal abuse that followed, and the unprovoked physical assault. I feared not only for my own safety but for my unborn child's, Victoria stated. Since then, Miss Anna Blake has continued to insert herself into my life, appearing at places where she knows I'll be, sending me threatening text messages, and most recently, attempting to break into my home. This last statement caused another stir in the courtroom. Campbell presented the security footage from the mansion, showing Sophia prowling around the property late at night, attempting to access the house through a side door. Maxwell, when called to testify, seemed torn under oath. He reluctantly confirmed that Sophia had indeed slapped Victoria, though he characterized it as a momentary loss of control during a heated discussion. He neither confirmed nor denied the affair, citing business confidentiality when questioned about the nature of his relationship with Sophia. After hearing all testimony, Judge Harmon took only a brief recess before returning with her decision. "The evidence in this case is clear and compelling," she stated firmly. "The court finds that Mrs. Blake poses a credible threat to Mrs. Matthews' safety and well-being. The temporary restraining order is hereby made permanent. Ms. Blake is to remain at least 500 feet from Mrs. Matthews, her home, and any location where Mrs. Matthews is known to be present. Any violation will result in immediate arrest." The judge then fixed Sophia with a stern gaze. "Furthermore, the evidence of attempted breaking and entering has been referred to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. This court takes the safety of pregnant women very seriously. Ms. Blake," Sophia's face contorted with barely contained rage. She suddenly stood, ignoring her attorney's attempt to restrain her. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "She's manipulating all of you. She's the one who's unstable, not me." "Ms. Blake," Judge Harmon warned, "control yourself or I'll hold you in contempt." But Sophia was beyond caution. "You think you've won," she hissed at Victoria. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." "That's enough," Judge Harmon said sharply, nodding to the bailiff. "Remove Ms. Blake from my courtroom," as Sophia was escorted out, still hurling threats. Victoria remained seated, one hand on her belly, feeling the baby move restlessly as if sensing the tension. Maxwell wouldn't meet her eyes, his gaze fixed on the floor, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy had intensified. Campbell created a protective barrier around Victoria as they navigated to the waiting car. "Mrs. Matthews, do you have a statement?" called a reporter from the Hartford Courier. Victoria paused briefly. "I sought this restraining order to protect myself and my unborn child," she said, her voice steady. "I am grateful to the court for recognizing that need. That's all I have to say at this time." In the car, Victoria finally allowed herself to exhale, the tension of the morning leaving her body in a rush. "What happens now?" she asked Campbell. "Now we proceed with the legal separation, if that's still what you want," he replied. "The restraining order against Miss Blake strengthens our position considerably. Maxwell's testimony, while reluctant, did confirm the assault. He's on shaky ground. Victoria nodded, staring out at the rain-slicked streets. "Let's move forward," she said quietly. "I need to protect my child from all of this." Back at the mansion, Victoria found Maxwell waiting in the foyer, his expression unreadable. She tensed, instinctively placing a hand on her belly. "We need to talk," he said, his voice oddly subdued. Victoria nodded toward the sitting room, keeping a careful distance between them. Once seated, Maxwell ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking older than his 35 years. "I didn't want it to come to this," he began. "Public hearings, restraining orders, our private business becoming gossip for the entire state." "What did you want, Maxwell?" Victoria asked, too tired for anger. "For me to quietly accept your affair? To allow your mistress to assault me in our home?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "I got lost. Sophia was exciting, different. She made me feel..." "Stop," Victoria interrupted. "I don't need to hear how she made you feel. What matters is how you made me feel betrayed, humiliated, unsafe in my own home while carrying your child." Maxwell's shoulders slumped. "I never meant for you to get hurt. Things just spiraled." Victoria studied him, the man she had once built her life around. Now a stranger sitting across from her. "Andrew Campbell is preparing legal separation papers," she said evenly. I think it's best if you move out in the meantime. You're serious about this. It wasn't a question. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, Victoria confirmed. You chose her, Maxwell, repeatedly, even after she assaulted me. What did you expect? He stood abruptly, pacing the room. And what about our child? Have you thought about what this means for our baby, growing up in a broken home? Victoria's eyes flashed. Don't you dare, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Don't you dare use our child as a weapon. Not when you were the one who brought danger into this home. Not when you were discussing with Sophia how to paint me as an unfit mother to take my baby away. Maxwell froze. What are you talking about? Victoria reached for her phone, pulled up the bedroom security footage, and played Maxwell's conversation with Sophia about building a case against Victoria after the birth. The color drained from Maxwell's face as he heard his own voice discussing strategies to separate Victoria from her child. How did you? I protected myself, Victoria said simply. When it became clear you wouldn't, Maxwell sank back into his chair, the reality of his situation finally dawning on him. You've been recording everything. Not everything, Victoria corrected. Just the parts where you and your mistress plotted against me and my child. They sat in silence for a long moment, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the only sound in the room. I'll have my things out by tomorrow, Maxwell finally said, his voice hollow. My attorney will contact Campbell about the separation terms. As he rose to leave, Victoria called after him. There's something else you should know. Maxwell, he turned, wary. Walter Thompson's investigation revealed some interesting things about Sophia Blake, or should I say, Sarah Blackwood. She's done this before, with at least 3 other wealthy men. She's not in love with you. She's after the Matthews fortune. Maxwell's expression shifted from shock to disbelief to the first stirrings of doubt. You're lying. The files are on the desk in your study, Victoria said calmly. Bank records showing unusual transfers from your accounts to offshore holdings. Background checks revealing her previous identities. Testimonials from her previous targets. Read them, or don't. It's your choice. She stood carefully, one hand supporting her back as her pregnancy made quick movements increasingly difficult. But know this, I won't allow her to take what belongs to our child's future. Whatever happens between us, I will protect what my family has built. Maxwell stared at her, seeing perhaps for the first time the steel beneath Victoria's gentle exterior, without another word. He turned and left the room. Victoria heard his footsteps heading toward the study, where Thompson's files awaited that night. Victoria slept more peacefully than she had in months. The weight of secrets and uncertainty finally lifted from her shoulders. Whatever came next. She had taken control of her own narrative. The following weeks brought a flurry of legal activity. Maxwell moved into a downtown apartment, and the legal separation was finalized with surprisingly little resistance from him. Thompson's revelations about Sophia had apparently hit their mark. Maxwell had begun to distance himself from her, especially after discovering significant unauthorized transfers from his business accounts. Victoria focused on preparing for her child's arrival, converting one of the mansion's rooms into a nursery painted in soothing shades of yellow and green. She resumed some of her charitable work, carefully selecting events that would cause minimal stress and where she could count on supportive friends like Madison. It was Madison who first alerted Victoria to an alarming development. Have you seen this? She asked during a lunch date, sliding her tablet across the table. On the screen was a social media post from Sophia Blake, featuring a blurry image taken through a window of Victoria's home, accompanied by a rambling caption accusing Victoria of fabricating evidence and manipulating the courts. Most disturbing was the final line, "The truth will come out before that baby arrives. Count on it." Victoria's blood ran cold, despite the restraining order. Sophia was still watching her, still threatening her. She immediately contacted Campbell, who arranged for increased security at the mansion and filed a violation report with the police. That evening, as Victoria sat in the nursery arranging baby clothes, she heard a crash from downstairs, heart pounding. She locked the nursery door and called security. Within minutes, the house alarm blared, and she heard shouting, followed by the wail of police sirens. Later, wrapped in a blanket in the sitting room, Victoria listened as the head of security explained what had happened. Sophia had indeed broken into the mansion, apparently intending to access Victoria's computer and destroy evidence. She had been caught by security cameras and apprehended by the guards until police arrived. She was ranting, Mrs. Matthews, the security chief said grimly. Something about exposing the truth and taking back what's hers. The police have taken her into custody for violating the restraining order and breaking and entering. Victoria nodded, still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Thank you for your quick response. Please double-check all entry points before you leave. After the security team departed, Victoria called Campbell to update him, then Maxwell, who arrived at the mansion within 30 minutes, clearly shaken. Are you all right? He asked, genuine concern in his voice for the first time in months. The baby. We're fine, Victoria assured him, surprised by his apparent sincerity. Just shaken. Maxwell sank into a chair opposite her, running a hand through his disheveled hair. This is my fault. I never should have gotten involved with her. I never should have brought her into our lives. Victoria studied him, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the rumpled clothes so unlike his usually impeccable appearance. What's happening with you and Sophia now? She asked carefully. Maxwell gave a bitter laugh. It's over. Has been since I discovered she was systematically draining funds from my accounts. Nearly $3 million. Victoria, transferred to offshore accounts I can't trace. He shook his head. But that's not the worst of it. She's been sleeping with James Warner. Victoria raised an eyebrow. James Warner was Maxwell's business partner and supposed friend. For how long? At least 2 months, Maxwell said, the betrayal fresh in his voice. While she was still with me, while she was telling me she loved me, it was all a con, just like you said. They sat in silence for a moment, the grandfather clock ticking in the background. I've been a fool, Maxwell finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I threw away everything that mattered for a woman who saw me as nothing but a bank account, and I hurt the one person who truly cared about me in the process. Victoria felt a complicated mixture of vindication and sorrow. The man before her was a shadow of the confident, dynamic person she had married, yet she couldn't find it in herself to offer comfort. The wounds were still too fresh, the betrayal too profound. I should go, Maxwell said, standing. I just needed to make sure you were safe. He paused at the doorway. Victoria, I know it doesn't change anything, but I am sorry. Truly. After he left, Victoria sat in the quiet house, one hand on her belly, feeling the baby's movements. It's just us now, she whispered, but we're going to be okay. The next morning brought news that Sophia had been formally charged with multiple crimes violation of the restraining order, breaking and entering, attempted theft, and, most seriously, financial fraud based on evidence Maxwell had provided to the authorities. She was being held without bail due to the risk she posed to Victoria and her pattern of threatening behavior. Campbell called with an update on the separation proceedings. In light of recent events, Maxwell's team has agreed to all our terms, he explained. Full financial support for you and the baby. The mansion remains yours, and a trust fund for the child that Maxwell cannot access. He's not contesting anything. Victoria. And visitation rights? Victoria asked, thinking of the child who would soon enter this complicated situation. Supervised visits only, until the child is at least 1 year old. Campbell confirmed. After that, we can reassess based on Maxwell's behavior and commitment to being a responsible father. Victoria thanked him and hung up, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. This wasn't how she had imagined her life unfolding when she married Maxwell 5 years ago. But she was determined to create a stable, loving environment for her child, regardless of the circumstances. As her due date approached, Victoria found herself increasingly reflective. She sorted through old photographs, journals, and mementos from happier times, trying to make peace with the past before stepping into her future as a mother. One afternoon, while organizing the study. She came across a small velvet box tucked in the back of a drawer. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny heart. A note in Maxwell's handwriting read, "For our baby's first birthday, with all my love, Dad." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she realized Maxwell must have purchased this months ago, before the affair, before everything fell apart, somewhere in the chaos. He had once looked forward to being a father, had planned for a future with their child. The thought was both comforting and heartbreaking. She was still holding the bracelet when her water broke. The labor was long but uncomplicated. Nancy stayed by Victoria's side throughout, offering encouragement and support. Madison arrived halfway through, bringing flowers and steady companionship. Victoria had decided weeks earlier not to notify Maxwell until after the birth. She needed this moment to be peaceful, focused solely on bringing her child safely into the world. After 14 hours, Faith Elizabeth Matthews was born 7 pounds, 8 ounces, with a dusting of blonde hair and her mother's blue eyes, as the nurse placed the tiny bundle in Victoria's arms. A profound love unlike anything she had ever experienced washed over her. "Hello, Faith," she whispered, tracing a finger along her daughter's perfect cheek. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." Only after mother and baby were settled did Victoria send a brief text to Maxwell. "Faith Elizabeth Matthews, born 4:17 a.m., 7 lbs, 8 Oz, both doing well." Maxwell arrived at the hospital 2 hours later, hesitating at the doorway of the private room. A large teddy bear clutched awkwardly in his hands. "Come in," Victoria said softly, nodding to the chair beside her bed. "Meet your daughter." Maxwell approached carefully, setting the bear on a side table. His eyes widened as he took in the tiny face nestled against Victoria's chest. "She's perfect," he whispered, tears gathering in his eyes. "She looks like you." Victoria smiled, the first genuine smile she had directed at Maxwell in months. "Would you like to hold her?" Carefully, she transferred Faith into her father's arms. Maxwell cradled her with surprising tenderness, one finger gently stroking her tiny hand. When Faith reflexively gripped his finger, a tear slid down his cheek. "I've made so many mistakes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't deserve this moment." Victoria watched them, her heart full of complicated emotions. "Faith deserves to know her father," she said simply. "What kind of relationship you build with her is up to you. It will depend on your choices going forward." Maxwell nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I want to be in her life. Victoria, I want to be the father she deserves." "Then be that man," Victoria replied. "Not for me, but for her." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the beeping of hospital monitors and Faith's occasional soft sounds the only interruption. It wasn't forgiveness. Victoria wasn't ready for that, but it was a beginning, a fragile bridge toward a new kind of future. 3 months later, Victoria sat on the terrace of what was now officially her home, Faith sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside her. The legal separation had evolved into divorce proceedings, handled with surprising civility on both sides. Maxwell, seemingly transformed by fatherhood and chastened by his near destruction at Sophia's hands, had honored every agreement, attending parenting classes and proving himself reliable during his supervised visits with Faith. Sophia Blake had pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for returning most of the stolen funds and agreeing to leave the state permanently after serving a short prison sentence. The scandal had gradually faded from the headlines, replaced by newer, more sensational stories. Victoria's phone chimed with a text from Madison. "Lunch tomorrow. I've got the latest on Rebecca Thornfield's disaster of a charity gala." Victoria smiled, typing a quick affirmative response. Life was settling into a new normal, not the one she had planned, but one she was creating on her own terms. Faith stirred in her bassinet, making the little snuffling sound that usually preceded waking. Victoria lifted her daughter into her arms, breathing in the sweet baby scent of her hair. "We made it, little one," she murmured, "and we're going to be just fine." As the afternoon sun bathed them in golden light, Victoria felt a sense of peace wash over her. The path forward would have its challenges, But she had discovered a strength within herself that no betrayal could diminish, a resilience that would guide both her and Faith toward whatever the future held. In the quiet garden of what had once been a monument to her perfect marriage, Victoria Matthews had built something far more valuable, a testament to her own worth, independent of anyone else's validation. And as Faith's tiny hand curled around her finger, Victoria knew with absolute certainty that this moment, this love, this hard-won freedom was worth every painful step of the journey.